The boardroom fell silent as 28-year-old Bradley Morrison stood up, his designer suit crisp and his Harvard MBA confidence radiating through every fiber of his being. What none of the 12 board members sitting around that mahogany table knew was that they were about to witness the most spectacular career suicide in corporate America's history. The young executive pointed directly at the 65-year-old man sitting quietly at the far end of the table and declared with absolute authority, "This company no longer needs deadweight like you. You're fired, old man. Security will escort you out immediately." The older gentleman looked up slowly, removed his reading glasses with deliberate precision, and smiled in a way that made the temperature in that boardroom drop 20 degrees, because Bradley Morrison had just tried to fire his own father. But that's not even the most shocking part of this story. What Bradley didn't know was that the man he had just humiliated wasn't actually his father at all. It was Samuel Washington, Uncle Sam, the same legendary infrastructure expert from our previous story, now working undercover to expose the toxic nepotism and corruption that was destroying Morrison Industries from within. And what happened next would not only end Bradley's career, but send shockwaves through the entire corporate world that are still felt today. Before I tell you how this incredible corporate drama unfolded, let me ask you something. Have you ever worked for a company where the boss's son or daughter acted like they owned the place? Drop your city in the comments and tell me about the worst case of workplace nepotism you've ever witnessed. Because what you're about to hear will make every entitled rich kid story you've ever heard pale in comparison. Now, if you'll excuse me for just a moment, I need to sit down to tell this story properly. My back isn't what it used to be, and at my age, these long tailies require a bit of comfort. Thank you for bearing with an old storyteller who's seen too many corporate battles over the decades. To understand how we got to that explosive boardroom confrontation, we need to go back 6 months earlier to a private investigation that would change everything. Morrison Industries, a Fortune 500 manufacturing conglomerate based in Detroit, had been hemorrhaging money for 3 consecutive quarters. Stock prices were plummeting, major contracts were being lost to competitors, and employee morale had reached historic lows. What made this situation particularly puzzling was that Morrison Industries had always been known for its innovative products and strong leadership under founder and CEO Robert Morrison. Robert Morrison had built his company from a small tool and die shop into a billion-dollar empire over 40 years of relentless work and brilliant strategic decisions. But lately something had changed. Key executives were leaving, quality control was failing, and the company's reputation was being destroyed by a series of public relations disasters that seemed to originate from within the organization itself. The board of directors was growing increasingly concerned, but they faced a delicate situation. Robert Morrison owned controlling interest in the company, and his son Bradley had been promoted to executive vice president of operations just 2 years earlier, immediately after completing his MBA program. Several board members suspected that Bradley's rapid rise through the corporate hierarchy might be connected to the company's recent problems, but proving nepotism and incompetence against the founder's son required careful investigation. That's where Uncle Sam came in. Through his extensive network of corporate contacts, Sam had earned a reputation not just as an infrastructure expert, but as someone who could quietly investigate and expose internal corruption without leaving fingerprints. Companies would hire him under the cover of facilities management or systems consulting, while he actually gathered intelligence about embezzlement, fraud, or in this case, destructive nepotism. Morrison Industries head of security, Margaret Chun, no relation to the security guard from our previous story, had worked with Uncle Sam on 2 previous investigations at other companies. When the board approached her about conducting a discreet internal review, she immediately recommended bringing in Samuel Washington under the cover of a comprehensive infrastructure modernization project. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Uncle Sam would pose as a senior consultant brought in to evaluate and upgrade the company's aging manufacturing systems. This would give him access to every department, every executive meeting, and every operational decision while appearing to be just another technical expert doing routine maintenance work. What Uncle Sam discovered during his first week at Morrison Industries was worse than anyone had imagined. Bradley Morrison wasn't just an incompetent executive riding on his father's coattails. He was actively sabotaging the company in preparation for a hostile takeover attempt that would make him incredibly wealthy while destroying his father's life's work. The scheme was sophisticated and brutal. Bradley had been secretly negotiating with Titan Capital, a private equity firm known for acquiring struggling companies, stripping their assets, firing their workforce, and selling the pieces for massive profits. Bradley's plan was to create enough internal chaos and financial instability to justify a buyout offer that would appear to be saving the company from bankruptcy. In exchange for providing inside information and actively damaging Morrison Industries' operations, Bradley would receive a $20 million consulting fee from Titan Capital, plus a guaranteed executive position in their portfolio companies. It was the kind of betrayal that goes beyond business. It was a son destroying his father's legacy for personal gain. Uncle Sam spent weeks documenting Bradley's activities. Secret meetings with Titan Capital executives in expensive restaurants. Emails detailing which contracts to sabotage and which key employees to drive away. Financial records showing mysterious consulting payments and offshore accounts. Most damning of all, recordings of Bradley laughing with his conspirators about how easy it was to manipulate his old fool father into signing documents that weakened the company's competitive position. But Uncle Sam knew that simply presenting evidence to the board wouldn't be enough. Bradley had allies throughout the organization, people who owed their positions to his influence and who would fight to protect him. The only way to truly expose the conspiracy was to create a situation where Bradley would reveal his true nature in front of witnesses who couldn't be bought or intimidated. That's when Uncle Sam devised one of the most brilliant corporate stings in business history. Working with Margaret Chun and two trusted board members, he arranged for a special emergency board meeting to address what was described as a critical infrastructure crisis that required immediate executive decision-making. The meeting was scheduled for a Friday afternoon when Robert Morrison would be out of town at an industry conference, leaving Bradley as the senior Morrison family representative. What Bradley didn't know was that the entire meeting was being recorded, and that several of the people he thought were allies had actually been feeding information to Uncle Sam for weeks. The genius of the plan was that it relied on Bradley's own arrogance and sense of entitlement to destroy him. Uncle Sam had crafted a scenario where Bradley would feel compelled to demonstrate his authority in the most public and humiliating way possible, not knowing that every word would be documented and transmitted directly to his father and the legitimate board members. I have to pause here for a moment to tell you something, and I hope you'll forgive an old man's honesty. At this stage of life, we elders tend to become a bit more solitary, spending long hours reflecting on the corporate battles we've witnessed over the decades. It means the world to me that you're here, listening to these stories that might otherwise be forgotten. Your company, even through a screen, reminds me that these lessons about character and integrity still matter to people. The morning of the confrontation, Uncle Sam arrived at Morrison Industries dressed in his typical consultant attire, a well-worn but professional outfit that made him appear to be exactly what he claimed to be, a technical expert hired to solve infrastructure problems. He carried his usual sophisticated toolbox and wore the kind of unremarkable clothes that made him invisible to executives who measured worth by designer labels. Bradley Morrison, on the other hand, arrived that morning in a $3,000 Tom Ford suit, Italian leather shoes that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and a Rolex watch that could have paid for a luxury car. His appearance wasn't just about looking successful, it was about projecting dominance and reminding everyone in the building that he was Robert Morrison's son and heir apparent. The emergency board meeting was called for 2 p.m. in the executive conference room on the 30th floor. The room itself was a monument to corporate power, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Detroit, a conference table carved from a single piece of Brazilian rosewood, and leather chairs that had cost more than most people's annual salaries. As board members filed into the room, Uncle Sam quietly took his seat at the far end of the table, positioning himself where he could observe everyone while appearing to be focused on technical documents and infrastructure reports. His decades of experience had taught him that the most valuable intelligence was often gathered by people who knew how to be invisible in plain sight. Bradley entered the room like a young emperor surveying his domain. He had specifically chosen this moment to make his move because he knew his father was 3 time zones away and could uninterfere with what he was about to do. In Bradley's mind, this was the day he would finally assert complete control over Morrison Industries and accelerate his timeline for the Titan capital takeover. The meeting began with routine discussions about quarterly projections and operational challenges, but Uncle Sam could sense the tension building. Several board members kept glancing at Bradley with barely concealed suspicion, while Bradley himself seemed increasingly agitated as he waited for the right moment to make his dramatic announcement. Margaret Chen had positioned herself near the door, ostensibly to handle security concerns, but actually to ensure that no one could leave once Bradley began his performance. 2 other board members, Thomas Harrison, the former CFO, and Linda Rodriguez, who had run legal affairs for 15 years, had positioned themselves where they could observe Bradley's reactions while appearing to be focused on financial reports. 20 minutes into the meeting, Bradley made his move. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the marble floor with a sound that made everyone look up from their documents. The young executive's face was flushed with excitement and what Uncle Sam recognized as the particular kind of arrogance that comes from believing you're about to achieve ultimate victory. "Ladies and gentlemen," Bradley announced with theatrical authority, "I've called this emergency meeting because Morrison Industries faces challenges that require decisive leadership and immediate action." His voice carried the confident tone of someone who had rehearsed this speech multiple times, probably in front of a mirror while imagining the moment he would finally prove his superiority to everyone who had ever questioned his qualifications. "As many of you know," Bradley continued, walking around the table like a prosecutor addressing a jury, "this company has been held back by outdated thinking and resistance to necessary changes. We've been trying to solve 21st century problems with 20th century leadership, and the results speak for themselves. Declining profits, lost contracts, falling stock prices, deteriorating infrastructure." Uncle Sam watched this performance with the detached fascination of someone who had seen similar displays of corporate megalomania many times before. Bradley was following the classic pattern of ambitious executives who believe that destroying existing leadership is the fastest path to personal advancement. The young man had no idea that he was about to walk directly into a trap that would destroy not just his career, but his relationship with his father and his reputation throughout the business world. "The solution to our problems," Bradley declared with increasing volume and confidence, "requires removing obstacles that have been preventing this company from reaching its full potential. We need fresh perspectives, innovative approaches, and leadership that isn't stuck in the past." Then Bradley did exactly what Uncle Sam had predicted he would do. The young executive pointed directly at the older man sitting quietly at the end of the table and delivered the line that would be replayed in business schools for decades to come. "This company no longer needs deadweight like you. You're fired, old man. Security will escort you out immediately." The boardroom fell into complete silence. Not the kind of silence that indicates agreement or contemplation, but the kind of stunned silence that follows a catastrophic mistake. Several board members looked at each other with expressions of shock and disbelief, while others stared at Bradley as if he had just announced his intention to burn down the building. Uncle Sam slowly removed his reading glasses, folded them carefully, and placed them on the table in front of him. His movements were deliberate and calm, the actions of someone who had been expecting exactly this moment and was prepared for what would come next. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades dealing with arrogant young executives who confused inherited wealth with personal competence. "Mr. Morrison," Uncle Sam said with perfectly controlled composure, "I think there may be some confusion about who has the authority to fire whom in this organization. Would you like me to clarify your understanding of corporate hierarchy? Or would you prefer to retract that statement before you do permanent damage to your career and your relationship with your father?" Bradley's face went through a spectrum of expressions: confusion, anger, disbelief, and finally a kind of manic confidence that suggested he believed he was dealing with someone who did understand the situation. "Young man," Bradley replied with a condescending laugh, "I don't know what game you think you're playing, but I am Robert Morrison's son and heir to this company. I have more authority in this building than you will ever dream of having." Furthermore, Bradley continued, his voice rising with indignation, "I do appreciate being challenged by some aging consultant who probably does understand that this is a family business, and family loyalty comes before everything else. You work for Morrison Industries, which means you work for the Morrison family, which means you work for me." Margaret Chen stepped forward from her position near the door, her expression serious but controlled. "Mr. Morrison," she said in a voice that carried unmistakable authority, "I think you should sit down before this conversation goes any further. You're about to make some statements that you won't be able to take back." But Bradley was beyond listening to advice or warnings. The adrenaline of what he believed was his moment of triumph had taken over his judgment completely. He turned to Margaret with the kind of dismissive arrogance that had been building throughout his rapid rise in the company hierarchy. "Margaret," Bradley said with patronizing confidence, "I appreciate your concern, but this is an executive decision that doesn't require input from security personnel. Please arrange for this man's immediate removal from the building, and make sure his access cards are deactivated before he reaches the parking garage." That's when Uncle Sam stood up slowly, his movements carrying the dignity and composure of someone who had been waiting patiently for exactly this moment. When he spoke, his voice filled the room with the kind of authority that comes from decades of experience and absolute confidence in one's position. "Bradley Morrison," Uncle Sam said, reaching into his jacket pocket with deliberate precision, "I think it is time you learned something important about making assumptions and the consequences of treating people with disrespect based on appearances." He pulled out a smartphone, not the latest model, but one that was clearly configured with applications and access levels that most corporate executives had never seen. The screen displayed real-time monitoring systems, financial data, security protocols, and what appeared to be direct administrative access to Morrison Industries' most sensitive information. "This phone," Uncle Sam explained, holding the device so that everyone in the room could see the screen, "contains direct access to every critical system in this building. Every financial record for the past 6 months and complete documentation of communications between Morrison Industries executives and outside parties, including private equity firms that might be interested in acquiring struggling companies." Bradley's confident expression began to shift as the implications of what Uncle Sam was saying started to penetrate his arrogance. The young executive looked around the room searching for support or confirmation that this was some kind of elaborate joke, but the expressions on the board members' faces told him that something was very wrong with his understanding of the situation. "It also contains," Uncle Sam continued with devastating precision, "detailed recordings of conversations between certain Morrison Industries executives and representatives of Titan Capital, discussing strategies for deliberately damaging this company's operations in preparation for a hostile takeover that would benefit those executives personally while destroying the life-cycle work of the company's founder." The color drained from Bradley's face as the full scope of what was happening began to dawn on him. He looked around the room desperately, seeking some indication that this was a misunderstanding that could be explained away, but the expressions of the board members made it clear that they had been expecting this revelation. Now, before Uncle Sam reveals the most shocking evidence of all, I need to know where you rewatching from and whether you've ever dealt with workplace nepotism this extreme. Comment your city below and tell me about the worst case of a boss's kid abusing their power that you've witnessed. Because what happens next is going to shock everyone in that boardroom, and it's just going to teach Bradley Morrison a lesson about respect and consequences that he'll never forget. Furthermore, Uncle Sam said, his voice carrying the controlled intensity of someone delivering a carefully prepared prosecution, "This phone contains video recordings of meetings where strategies were discussed for manipulating Mr. Robert Morrison into signing documents that would weaken his company's competitive position, as well as financial records showing payments to offshore accounts in exchange for providing proprietary information to competitors. Bradley tried to speak but only managed to produce stammering sounds that conveyed his growing panic. The young executive finally understood that he was dealing with some aging consultant who could be intimidated and dismissed. He was facing someone who had been systematically documenting his treachery for months and was now prepared to destroy him, with evidence that couldn't be denied or explained away. Margaret Chun stepped forward again, this time producing an official-looking document from her briefcase. "Mr. Morrison," she said with formal authority, "this is a cease and desist order regarding your communications with Titan Capital, along with a formal notice that you are being removed from all executive responsibilities pending a complete investigation of your activities over the past 18 months. But the most devastating revelation was yet to come. Uncle Sam reached into his jacket again and produced a second phone, this one clearly displaying an active video conference connection. The screen showed Robert Morrison himself, sitting in what appeared to be a hotel conference room, his face a mixture of profound sadness and barely controlled fury. "Hello, Bradley," Robert Morrison's voice came through the phone speaker with crystal clarity. "I've been listening to this entire conversation from my conference in Chicago, and I want you to know that everything you've said and done in the past 30 minutes has been recorded and witnessed by board members, who will be voting on your future with this company within the next 24 hours. The effect on Bradley was immediate and devastating. The young man collapsed into his chair as if his legs could no longer support his weight, his face cycling through expressions of shock, denial, and growing comprehension of the magnitude of his situation. The son who had thought he was about to seize control of his father's empire suddenly realized that he had instead destroyed any possibility of inheriting it. "Son," Robert Morrison continued, his voice heavy with disappointment that was somehow more devastating than anger would have been, "I brought you into this company because I believed in your potential and wanted to share with you everything I had built over 4 decades of work. I trusted you with responsibilities that I had never given to anyone outside our family, and I defended your rapid promotions against board members who questioned whether you had earned those positions." Bradley tried to speak, but his father's voice cut through any attempt at explanation or excuse. "The damage you have done to Morrison Industries goes far beyond financial losses or competitive disadvantages," Robert Morrison said with controlled precision. "You have betrayed the trust of every employee who believed in our family's commitment to their welfare. You have violated the confidence of business partners who expected integrity from the Morrison name. Most importantly, you have shown that you view our company not as a legacy to be preserved and improved, but as an asset to be exploited for personal gain." Uncle Sam had remained standing throughout this revelation, watching Bradley's destruction with the detached professional interest of someone who had engineered dozens of similar corporate exposures. There was no satisfaction in his expression, only the quiet competence of someone who had completed a difficult but necessary task. The board members were equally silent, recognizing that they were witnessing not just the end of Bradley Morrison's corporate career, but the dissolution of a family relationship that could never be repaired. The young man who had entered that boardroom believing he was about to achieve ultimate victory had instead achieved the complete destruction of everything he had claimed to value. Robert Morrison's voice came through the speaker again, now addressing the broader room rather than his son specifically. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said with formal authority, "I want to personally thank Samuel Washington for his professional and thorough investigation of the serious allegations that had been brought to my attention over the past several months. The revelation that Uncle Sam was not just some random consultant, but a deliberately placed investigator, hit Bradley like a final crushing blow." The young executive looked up at Uncle Sam with an expression of complete defeat, finally understanding that everything he had believed about his position and power had been an illusion carefully maintained. "While evidence of his treachery was being systematically gathered, Mr. Washington," Robert Morrison continued, "has provided us with documentation that will be turned over to both our legal department and appropriate federal authorities for investigation of possible securities, fraud, corporate espionage, and violation of fiduciary duties." The evidence is comprehensive and appears to be legally sufficient for both civil and criminal proceedings. Uncle Sam finally sat down, his investigation complete and his role in this corporate drama nearly finished. When he spoke, his voice carried the wisdom of someone who had seen similar betrayals many times throughout his long career, but who still found each instance personally disappointing. "Bradley," Uncle Sam said with a gentleness that was somehow more devastating than harsh condemnation would have been, "I want you to understand that what happened here today didn't have to happen. You had opportunities to choose integrity over personal gain, loyalty over betrayal, long-term thinking over short-term profit. Every step of the way, you could have made different decisions that would have preserved your relationship with your father and your future with this company." The young executive looked up with tears in his eyes, finally comprehending the magnitude of what he had destroyed through his greed and arrogance. Uncle Sam continued with the patient tone of someone delivering a lesson that needed to be learned and remembered. "Your father built this company through decades of hard work, innovative thinking, and genuine care for his employees and customers," Uncle Sam explained. "He created something of lasting value that provided good jobs for thousands of families and products that improved people's lives. When he brought you into the business, he was offering you the opportunity to be part of that legacy and to build upon what he had created. Instead," Uncle Sam continued, "you chose to view this company as nothing more than a source of personal wealth that could be exploited and eventually sold to the highest bidder. You were willing to destroy your father's life's work, eliminate jobs that supported families, and betray business partners who had trusted the Morrison name for decades." Bradley tried to speak, his voice cracking with emotion and desperation. "Dad," he said, looking directly at the phone screen where his father's image was displayed, "I know I made mistakes, but I was trying to position the company for growth and modernization. The arrangement with Titan Capital was supposed to provide resources for expansion and technological upgrades." Robert Morrison's response was immediate and devastating. "Son," he said with cold precision, "I've seen the financial projections and strategic plans that Titan Capital shared with you. Their intention was never to grow Morrison Industries or preserve its workforce. Their business model is based on acquiring companies at below-market prices, selling off valuable assets, eliminating redundant operations, and extracting maximum profit before dissolving what remains." Furthermore, Robert Murdoch continued, "The personal financial arrangements you negotiated show that your primary motivation was the $20 million consulting fee you would receive for facilitating the takeover, not any genuine concern for the company's future. You were willing to destroy 4 decades of family legacy for personal profit that would last you perhaps a few years of expensive living." Margaret Chun stepped forward again, this time holding a thick folder of documents. "Mr. Bradley Morrison," she said with official authority, "you are hereby terminated from all positions within Morrison Industries, effective immediately. Your corporate access cards, company credit cards, and company vehicle will be confiscated before you leave the building. You have 24 hours to remove personal items from your office under security supervision." But the professional consequences were only the beginning of Bradley's punishment. Robert Morrison's voice came through the speaker again, now addressing his son with the finality of someone making an irreversible decision. "Bradley, your actions have not only violated your professional responsibilities, but have betrayed the fundamental trust that exists between family members," Robert Morrison said with quiet devastation. "I cannot and will not allow someone who has proven capable of such betrayal to remain in any position where they could damage this company or harm the people who depend on it for their livelihoods. Effective immediately, you are removed from all family trusts, inheritance provisions, and financial arrangements associated with Morrison Industries. Your behavior has demonstrated that you view our family's business legacy as nothing more than personal property to be exploited, and I will not enable further destruction through continued financial support." The complete finality of this statement hit Bradley like a physical blow. He had not only lost his corporate position and his inheritance, but had destroyed his relationship with his father in a way that could never be repaired. The young man who had entered that boardroom believing he was about to seize control of an empire was leaving it with nothing but the clothes on his back and a reputation that would make him unemployable in legitimate business. Uncle Sam stood up slowly, gathering his documents and preparing to leave a scene that had become too painful to witness. But before departing, he turned to Bradley one final time with words that would echo in the young man's mind for the rest of his life. "Bradley," Uncle Sam said with infinite sadness, "I've spent 40 years working with family businesses, and I've seen many situations where the next generation struggled to live up to their parents' achievements. But I've never seen anyone deliberately destroy something so valuable and meaningful for such selfish and short-sighted reasons." "Your father didn't just build a company," Uncle Sam continued. "He built something that provided security and dignity for thousands of families, created products that improved people's lives, and established business relationships based on trust and mutual respect. When he offered to share that legacy with you, he was giving you the opportunity to be part of something larger than yourself. Instead, you chose to betray that trust in the most complete way possible. You didn't just steal money or make bad business decisions. You actively worked to destroy everything your father had created, and you did it while pretending to be loyal and trustworthy. That kind of betrayal goes beyond business. It reveals something fundamental about character that can't be fixed or forgiven." The boardroom was completely silent as Uncle Sam walked toward the door, his role in this corporate drama complete. Bradley sat in his chair, staring at the table, finally comprehending that he had destroyed not just his career and his inheritance, but any possibility of redemption or reconciliation with his family. Robert Morrison's voice came through the speaker one final time, addressing the remaining board members with instructions for moving forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said with renewed authority, "we will need to meet tomorrow morning to discuss restructuring our executive leadership and implementing new oversight procedures to prevent similar situations from occurring in the future. I will be returning to Detroit immediately to personally oversee the transition and to ensure that our employees and business partners understand that Morrison Industries remains committed to the values and principles that have guided us for 4 decades. This incident, while deeply disappointing, will not define our company's future or compromise our commitment to integrity and excellence." The board members began filing out of the room, leaving Bradley sitting alone at the mahogany table where he had expected to claim his victory. Margaret Chun remained behind to ensure that security protocols were followed and that sensitive documents were properly secured. As Uncle Sam reached the elevator, he paused to reflect on what had just transpired. In his 4 decades of corporate investigation and infrastructure consulting, he had exposed embezzlement schemes, safety violations, environmental cover-ups, and various forms of executive misconduct. But the deliberate betrayal of family trust for personal gain remained one of the most disturbing forms of corporate corruption he had ever encountered. The elevator doors opened, and Uncle Sam stepped inside, knowing that his work at Morrison Industries was complete, but that the consequences of Bradley Morrison's choices would continue reverberating for years to come. The young man who had believed that his family name gave him unlimited power had learned that true authority comes from earning respect through competence and integrity, not from exploiting inherited privilege. Over the following months, Morrison Industries underwent a complete leadership restructuring under Robert Morrison's direct supervision. The company not only recovered from the financial damage caused by Bradley's sabotage, but emerged stronger and more competitive than ever. New management systems were implemented to prevent nepotism and ensure that all executive positions were filled based on merit rather than family connections. Bradley Morrison disappeared from the corporate world entirely. His reputation for betrayal and his father's very public disavowal made him unemployable in any legitimate business role. Some reports suggested he had moved to another country and was working under an assumed name, but most corporate observers believed his career in American business was permanently finished. Robert Morrison continued leading the company for 3 more years before transitioning leadership to a team of professional managers, who had earned their positions through decades of dedicated service and proven competence. In his final shareholder letter, he wrote that the most important lesson he had learned was that family businesses must never compromise professional standards for personal loyalty. Uncle Sam returned to his consulting work, quietly helping other companies identify and address internal corruption while maintaining the low profile that had made him so effective throughout his career. The Morrison Industries investigation became a case study in business schools, illustrating both the dangers of unchecked nepotism and the importance of implementing systems that reward merit over inherited privilege. But the most lasting impact of that boardroom confrontation was the lesson it taught about the nature of true leadership and the consequences of betraying trust. Bradley Morrison had possessed every advantage that wealth and family connections could provide, but he had lacked the character and integrity necessary to build upon his father's legacy. The story serves as a reminder that real authority comes from earning respect through competence and ethical behavior, not from exploiting inherited privilege or manipulating family relationships for personal gain. In the end, Bradley Morrison's attempt to seize power through betrayal resulted in the complete destruction of everything he had claimed to value. So, what do you think happened to Bradley after losing everything? Did he learn from this devastating lesson, or did his arrogance and sense of entitlement lead him down an even darker path? I'll tell you in Uncle Sam's next story, but first, I need to know what you think about workplace nepotism and family business dynamics. Have you ever worked for a company where the boss's children were given positions they had unearned? Tell me in the comments what city you're watching from and share your experiences with workplace favoritism. Because Uncle Sam's next story involves a tech startup founder who discovered that his business partner had been stealing not just money, but the revolutionary software code that would change the industry forever. The lesson remains clear and unchanging. Integrity and competence cannot be inherited or purchased. They must be earned through consistent ethical behavior and genuine dedication to something larger than personal gain. Because when you betray the trust of people who believed in you, especially family members who offered you opportunities you hadn't earned, the consequences extend far beyond professional failure to the complete destruction of relationships that can never be repaired. And sometimes those consequences serve as exactly the lesson that the business world needs to remember about the true meaning of leadership and responsibility.